Okay.
Okay, I'd like to dedicate the share that we, as Israel, win the war with no deaths or casualties. The hostages are freed, and we smash our enemies, and that we're protected, and the land of Israel is protected internally as well as externally, and that all those that are sick have a full refuah, and we all have a very good week. Kevin, teach us.
Amen. Something interesting I told Damon the other day. Certain things in Israel have more holiness or have holiness that Chutz La'aretz doesn't have. For instance, and this, I'm going to give you a practical example. I like picking fruit from public trees, like lemons, and especially in places like Ranana and then Beit Shemesh, you get a lot of citrus here. And even last week, I found some pomelos and grapefruits, and I found some oranges in Tel Aviv on my run yesterday. And I've got some lemons on Friday afternoon before Shabbos in Beit Shemesh. And you can't just consume them. You actually have to take truma and maisa, which is basically in the temple times giving the portion to the Levi. So I had to find out what I need to do. So what you do here practically, because it's not a Shemitah year, it's 2 years after the Jubilee year. So you have to take 1% cut 1% of the fruit and wrap it, double wrap it, and say a special brocha on it. And also take something that one cooks with, like sugar, a tablespoon of that separately, and say a separate declaration on that. Double wrap it and throw it. And so this is what I have to do. So I actually bought back a whole lot of lemons, but I'm going to do one brocha for everything with the oranges I got yesterday from Tel Aviv. And this is what you have to do, because the produce of the land has a holiness attached to it. It's not like if you get an apple from a tree in Joburg, you can just pull it off and eat it, or an orange, or whatever fruit. You don't have to. It doesn't require a blessing, or there's no holiness attached to it.
Okay.
So compared to here, so there's certain rules, and it's not so simple finding what brocha or what you need to do. So Rov in Tel Aviv told me what I had to do. So thankfully there are people that can assist with this procedure.
Okay, good. Let's start the share. Okay, so where we left off was the fact that there was this whole issue about risk. So in a case where a barrel has a hole in, and in a few minutes it's going to leak out, there is a problem, because in that case you can't dedicate that to Maisa or Truma and then keep your 90% at home, mitigating the risk on your side, where the financial loss ends up being for the Leviim or the temple or the poor, because that is a fait accompli. We're saying what happens in a case of when you're walking on the road and there's a robber. You've got a 50-50 chance that he'll make you. Why? Because there might be one or two other people on the road. He might have had his full for the day of what he's taken. It's a 50-50. It's not a guarantee. But can you all of a sudden deconsecrate those coins? What did we say what deconsecration was about? Well, generally, when you go to Yerushalayim, you would have had to have taken your produce, and if it was in the middle of the hot season, it could go off by the time you went from wherever you lived all the way to Jerusalem. If you lived in Tel Aviv, or perhaps you lived out of Eretz Israel, and you had your 3 pilgrimage festivals, and the weight of the produce might have been very logistically heavy to carry. So what you do is you take the sanctity and you deconsecrate that to coins. So those coins, you can buy produce in Yerushalayim and then transfer that sanctity back to the produce. And your produce that had the sanctity becomes ordinary produce that can be eaten. So we're saying that these are normal coins. Can you suddenly deconsecrate them where the sanctity goes in the coins, that if they're stolen, you don't have to make the trip to Yerushalayim? And then what bears the brunt of that cost is not yours. It's what you would have given for the produce for the temple offerings. And we're saying if it's a fait accompli that those coins would be stolen, of course you can't. If it's a 50-50, well, then that remains a question, because the Gemara says that basically you shouldn't do it, but if you did it, it's considered that your word stands. So we're saying, how can this be? Because either it's a case where it's high risk, in which case you're not allowed to, it's the same like the barrel with the hole in, you're not allowed to let somebody else fit the bill for your losses. But if there's a low probability, then what's the problem? Why can't you deconsecrate it onto the coins? And if there's a doubt that you shouldn't, but if you do the word stand, well, what is it? Is it risky? Is it not risky? And we deal with this question about what's the story. So the Brisa answers that we're speaking of a case where basically the Jew can save his coins with difficulty. So although the coins are his own, he can't transfer Ma'aser Sheni sanctity to them if there's a very real possibility that they're going to be lost. When we say the term lost, we don't mean lost like he doesn't know where they are. We mean that he's cracked over the head and stolen from him. Lost as in lost from use. So the mere possibility that they'll be lost bars them for such use. And you can't consecrate property if there's a likelihood it'll be lost. As far as the words taking effect, if you say that and you shouldn't do it, they stand, we're saying it's basically where the risk is low. So, but then a question, the Gemara says, well, if that's the assumption and there exists even a likelihood of loss, you should preferably not say words to consecrate the property, because we learned in a Brisa the following. If you've got a Levite, a Levi, and he had 10 barrels of contaminated Tevel wine. So what's Tevel wine? It's Tamei wine of Ma'aser Rishon from which Truma Ma'aser hasn't been taken. So let me just give you the circumstances there as far as that's concerned. So the first thing that happens is that we're saying that there's a Torah commandment where an Israelite has to take 1/10 of his produce as Ma'aser Rishon. What's Ma'aser Rishon? For people like me that don't speak Hebrew, it's the first tithing. And you've got to give that first tithing to a Levi. So then what happens is when it enters the premises of the Levite, he's got to then take his portion and separate 1/10 of that Ma'aser Rishon as Trumas Ma'aser and give it to the Kohen. So Trumas Ma'aser is the 10% that the Levi gives to the Kohen, and the Ma'aser Rishon is the 10% that the Israelite gives to the Levi at first. So the Brisa is speaking of a case where the Tevel was contaminated with Tumah. So what do we mean? There was a dead body near there, or sherets, etc., and therefore you can't use it. Now, this concept of Tevel occurs without the Tumah aspect. So Tevel means that if, okay, so we've got Israelites here and we've got Kohanim and Levim. So if, for example, Kevin and Arthur give their 10% to me as a Levi, until I give it to Gavin as a Cohen, my 10% on the 10% that I've received. So it's 10% that I took from Kevin or Arthur, but it's 100% to me. So in other words, there's 10,000 Rand and worth, and Kevin gives me 1,000 Rands worth. It's a 10th. Then I give of that 1,000 Rand, 10% of that to Gavin, which is a Cohen. Now, until I give it to Gavin, Kevin can't make use of it. So it's Tevel. Kevin's portion is prohibited for use as an Israelite until I give Gavin his share. So there are certain leniencies where the Levi has to move rather quickly and make sure that Gavin as a Cohen gets his amount. Otherwise, Kevin suffers as an Israelite that he can't use it, and it is prohibited for use. That's what Tevel actually means. There are different ways that things are prohibited for use. One of them is this concept of Tumah. If it's infected with spiritual impurity, it cannot be used, and therefore it's almost got the status of tevel. It's prohibited for consumption, basically. Then you've got a separate case where you've got a barrel of wine, for example. And then Arthur left the lid open on the barrel of wine. So what does this mean? What's the issue with the barrel of wine of the lid being left off? Arthur, what is it? We went through it before. It was in Chul in 49b. Can't hear you, mate.
You talking to me, Dan?
You're the only Arthur in the show. Yeah, I am.
I'm sorry, my daughter was talking to me about the kitchen. So
Yeah,
I
I've
heard
got a
it's calling
sixth sense.
49B. I just didn't hear what that.
Okay, I've got a sixth sense when you're not
I'm busy
concentrating.
cooking for the family.
Stupid, why did you tell me it's on?
Oh, okay.
I'm my fucking bra.
Just beep that out.
Okay. As long as we didn't see it, her Tourette's is not the end of the world. All right. So, what we are saying is here, if you leave a lid off a barrel of wine, in the old days, you had a problem with reptiles. Now, most people don't keep reptiles like I used to, because they're poisonous. So snakes, etc., what happens is they also have to drink, and a barrel that's left uncovered, there's a risk that venom can contaminate it. Now, they basically force various sorts of liquids that a snake is attracted to. It's normal water. For some reason, it's also wine. I'm not sure why, but it is. Milk, honey, and fish brown. They like fish brown for some reason. So if the lid remains off, or it remains uncovered long enough, now it's not that the lid is taken off for a second. It means that the lid is taken off long enough for a creature that's hidden nearby to exit its hiding place, drink, and return to its lair. So the laws don't apply in present day, especially in cities, because snakes are not commonly found. However, you've always got people that, or certain opinions that hold by a minhag. So what's a minhag? If you've been doing something for thousands of years, that tradition sticks, even though that situation isn't available. And there are other Rabbonim that paskin that there are no snake dangers today. So we don't have to keep that particular minhag. So we're saying there are three ways that something can become prohibited for use. The one thing is that Kevin can't use his 9 barrels if, when I got the 1 barrel, I never separated a tenth and gave it to Gavin the Coven as the Levite that I am. So that remains tevel, prohibited for benefit. The second type of prohibition for benefit is tuba, something that has spiritual infection in, that doesn't have physiological effects, like there's a sheret or a dead body or something near there that has spiritual contamination. The third sort of prohibition is something where it's at risk to life, where it can either maim, kill, or damage central nervous system, tissue, neurology, physiology, etc., etc. This is actual damage, not spiritual damage. And therefore, poison within an unleft open container is a problem. So we're going to see where all these issues underlie. So basically, what there is an opinion that says as follows. If a Levite had 10 barrels of contaminated tevel, in other words, Tameh wine of Maisa Rishon, where Kevin, as the Israelite, gave it to me, from which Trumas Maisa hadn't yet been taken, I hadn't yet given it to Gavin as the Kohen. Because I saw that one of them had become broken, allowing the wine to drain away, or it became uncovered. Therefore, a snake could have infected it with venom and it becomes forbidden. He says the barrel is hereby Trumas Maisa upon its 9 fellows. So what do you mean Trumas Maisa upon its 9 fellows? We're saying at the end of the day, although the wine is draining away and stands to be lost, the Levite is permitted to designate it as Trumas Maisa. Because even if the Kohen had received the wine, it would have been of only minimal value to him, since it was limited to sprinkling So the Levi's designation of the broken barrel as Trumas Maisa represents only a minor loss to a Kohen. Since the loss is minor, the designation is permissible. Now I'm going to link this to risk probability of coins that are deconsecrated because they could possibly be stolen. But let's just deal with one issue at a time. The first issue, Kevin, are you with me? Look tight, Kev, you with me? Okay. So the first issue, Kevin, is that if one is got tumah in, or is tameh, is impure, what that means is that you, Kevin, myself as a Levi, or Gavin as a Kohen, cannot drink that wine. It would spiritually infect us. It's tameh, it's impure. So there is a use for that wine that's left, and that is sprinkling that wine for its aroma. Because in the old days, they would let aged wine be sprinkled, and it would create almost, they didn't exactly have aerosol cans after one went to the toilet. So they had things that would create aroma in the home because there was a lot of dust, and it would give off this fragrance, if you will. So although it's lost the majority of its value, then in that particular case, because it's tumah, you can give it to the Kohen if the barrel leaks. So Gavin, this is what I'm saying, is in a case where I've got a barrel, or Kevin's got a barrel to give to me and I give it to you, whatever the case may be, the problem is that I mustn't divert the risk to me as a Levi from Kevin, or me to you as a Kohen, Gav. However, that's when the wine is in a non-contaminated state and it's worth something because your loss is high. But at the point where the barrels get infected with spiritual impurity, the value then of the wine drops, which means the value is low. And at the point where the value is low, I can give you that barrel of wine, Gavin, even if it's got a leak in, because you can't use it for anything more than the aroma of sprinkling it in the house, because it's tumah. So if a barrel has got high value because it's not tumah and it's broken, I can't give it to you and mitigate my loss to you. However, if it's tumah and the value is already dropped because it's spiritually impure, then in that particular case, if it's leaking, you've lost something that's worth low value anyway, and therefore I can give it to you. And the reason I can give it to you, and there are different rules about the strictness, is because it affects Kevin's 9 barrels. And therefore, me withholding giving it to you is going to affect Kevin. And where that value is too low, because it's tumah, if it's leaking a barrel and something that's worth not a lot, it's a minor loss to you. If that wine is a Sauvignon Blanc, or I'm giving you a barrel of whiskey and it's Chivas Regal and it starts leaking, I'm not entitled for you to mitigate that loss. I have to take one of my good barrels and give it to you. Do you get it, guys?
Yeah.
So the loss is also what the product is worth compared to what it's not worth. So that's the first thing to do that. So what we're saying is the barrel is hereby Trumas Maisa upon its 9 fellows, meaning what I give as a Levi to Gavin is basically a case. Just hang on, guys, a second. All right, so as a Levi, what I give to Gavin, there's more allowance than what Kevin can give to me. So at the minute it becomes tameh, if there's a leak in the barrel, I can give it to Gavin. There's a leniency, okay? Because the resulting loss of the Kohen isn't big. However, if it's oil, there's a problem. Why if there's an oil? Because, Kevin, in this particular case, oil's primary value is not just for drinking it. Arthur, are you with me? Is Adina still talking to you? Can you wave if you're with me? Okay.
I'm with you. She's after him.
Okay, excellent. So what we're saying is as follows, is in a case where Arthur has oil, if that becomes tameh, it's not a problem. Why? Because I could, if it wasn't tameh, use the oil to fry latkes in. But if the oil becomes tameh, it still has huge value in what respect? in the respect that I can use it for kindling fire and for keeping warm and for lighting a place up. So the value is still there. So Arthur cannot give me a barrel of his that's leaking and keep the other ones for himself that aren't leaking, because the loss is high. It doesn't get affected by the tumor the same way the wine is. However, if that oil also gets infected by, if you leave it uncovered and then for some reason, oil is a bad example because oil itself, snakes are not going to drink from it. But if for whatever reason it becomes it's a high value product that isn't affected by tumor because it's got a use other than consumption for drinking, but the benefits are auxiliary, then in that particular case, if it gets infected by poison, it still is of low value. The reason being is in that case, you can't even handle it because of the level of toxicity. So we got quite a lot going on here. You get it? Bottom line is mitigating risk has a lot to do with a probability of risk and value of item. Okay, so the Gemara solves the difficulty. Okay, the draining away of the Tameh wine represents only a minor loss to the Kohen. The Brisa therefore rules in its entirety that it's permissible to designate the wine in the broken barrel as Trumas Maisa. So I can take that Trumas Maisa and give it to Gavin as the Kohen because I'm a Levite. Because Kevin gave it to me as the Maisa Rishon the first time, so that Kevin can use the rest of his as an Israelite. Okay, so the Gemara is proposing that because the risk is low and it frees the other 9 barrels, then likewise in the case of a traveler faced by a robber, since the loss of his coins is not certain, he should be permitted to transfer Maisa Shani to them. Okay, so what are we actually saying here is that in that particular case, it is a loss or gain as far as whether or not there will be a robbery. It's a 50-50. And we state, we state firstly, in its question, the Gemara basically equates the minor loss represented by the draining away of the Tameh wine with the possible loss represented by the approach of a robber. So we're dealing with a definite loss, but a minor loss because it's Tameh, you can only use it to sprinkle for aroma, can't drink it. And therefore, if the barrel leaks in that case, it's not a big loss to the Kohen. And we're comparing that with the possible loss represented by the approach of a robber. So, yeah, the coins are worth a lot of money. So it's a major loss if he definitely gains them. But because the probability is 50-50, the Gemara's principle remains, and that is, and this is very important, the Gemara views an uncertain but major loss as the equivalent as a minor but inevitable loss. Again, the Gemara views an uncertain but major loss as the equivalent of a minor but inevitable loss. So accordingly, the Gemara asks, just as the Levi is entirely permitted to designate the wine in the broken barrel, that's Tuma and can only be used for sprinkling aroma, which isn't very expensive, is Trumas Maisa for the Kohen, it's a minor loss. So the traveler faced by a robber should be entirely permitted to transfer the Maisa Shani sanctity to the coins in the event that they get stolen, because there's a possibility that it would be lost. Okay? Possible. We're not sure. So that's what's proposed by the Gemara. So the Gemara resolves the difficulty, okay? And it says, Rav Yirmiyah said that this permits the wine in a broken barrel to be designated as Trumas Maisa only when there's a netting around the barrel, as if it was an olive press. So we said. The Bava Kamma of the Gemara says, listen, if it's a guaranteed loss, but it's minor, because of the tumor status of the wine, then the Kohen can take that loss and it frees up the 9 barrels. Rav Yirmiyah doesn't agree. He said, look, at the end of the day, you can only designate it if the leakage is very slow and it's dripping drop by drop, because you've put a stocking or a netting around the barrel to prevent the leakage from being rapid, and it's a drop by drop. So you're able to save the majority, and it stops it from draining out quickly. So this minimizes the potential loss to the Kohen, and it's a lesser degree than the potential loss represented by the approach of the robber. Therefore, though consecration of the wine is permitted, consecration of the coins is forbidden. So all of a sudden, according to Rav Yirmiyah's opinion, it changes the playing field. Why does it change the playing field, Arthur?
No idea why it changes.
Okay, so it changes for the following reason. According to the Bryce and the Tanna Kamma originally, you had a case where definite loss of minor value to the Kohen. It's permitted to give that broken barrel of Trumas Maisa to the Kohen because the wine is tamei, it's impure, can only be used for aroma sprinkling around the house. Okay? And therefore, that is compared to a case where you've got a 50-50 chance of a robbery, but it's a lot of money. So we are comparing risk of higher value, but a 50-50 risk versus a definite loss of a low value. And we're saying, while that playing field is equal in financial amount, you find. Rav Yirmiyah is now saying that this law applies, that you can only dedicate that broken barrel, that's tamei, to a Kohen if the leakage is slow, that it drains away drop by drop. Now, all of a sudden, the risk of the barrel leaking is low, where you can't save the majority of it. And therefore, you can't equate that to where the risk is 50-50, but the value is high. So it's not the same game anymore, according to Rav Yirmiyah. And therefore, that proposition doesn't work. Do you get what I'm saying? Why? Since the loss in this case is of a lesser degree, the Levi is permitted to designate the wine in the broken barrels Trumas Maisa, right, guys? But the loss in the case involving the robber is of a greater degree, maybe not in risk, but certainly in risk, because here it's a 50-50 with the robber and the deconsecrated coins being a problem, compared to a barrel that leaks drop by drop slowly. So the risk is higher, plus coupled with the fact that the financial value of tamei wine is negligible compared to the coins that the traveler has, is that you cannot transfer sanctity to those coins. Okay, so the Gemara is persisting and it says, all right, so which way is it? Is it according to Rav Yirmiyah or is it according to the Tanna Kamma? So the Gemara says, all is well in the case where the barrel becomes broken, for the wine saved by the netting is fit for use by the Kohen, because the very slow leakage. But where the barrel becomes uncovered, you can't really use the wine. Why? Because it's different in the case of what you call spiritually impure, where the Kohen can't drink it because it becomes spiritually contaminated, to where that liquid is left uncovered, and you can become physiologically contaminated with the toxicity of a poisonous snake. And you certainly don't want to spray that around your house. So when the wine cannot be used, it's a bit difficult, because it's now almost worthless. But nevertheless, the Brisa permits the Levi to designate the contents of the uncovered barrel as Trumas Maisa. So we can see at the end of the day, when even none of the wine can be used, the Levi may sanctify it, since its prohibition represents only a minor loss to the Kohen. So we're saying, look, at the point where it became tamei and he could use it for sprinkling, that's not a high value product compared to drinking wine. So even now, if it becomes completely infected on top of that with poison, and there's a complete loss, at that point it was a loss from tamei of where it was wine sprinkling to none at all. But you can't compare it to the loss of drinkable wine compared to sprinkling wine, at which it's a major issue. But it's not the fault of the person having the barrel with a leak. It's just because the wine itself is tamei, or the wine. It's not as if just that barrel is tamei, because that's a problem, guys. That's a problem. You can't dump your risk onto somebody else. But if all the barrels are affected, then it's not as if your broken barrel is causing the major loss. So we see there's not a lot of loss from sprinkling wine to not being able to use the wine, but there is a lot of loss from drinking the wine and the value of that wine to the loss of sprinkling the wine. But at the point where it became tamei, if it now becomes infected with poison, it doesn't affect the equation. But you can only use a barrel that's broken, according to Rav Yirmiyah, that's been wrapped, because the loss is low for the Kohen. But according to the Bava Kamma, if it's tamei, it's also a small loss for the Kohen, because he can only use it for sprinkling, and that wine isn't worth a lot. And even if you can't, because there's poison, at the end of the day, there's not, when you're already dealing with tamei, if it's at the point where it goes from sprinkling to no sprinkling, there's hardly a loss. Likewise, in the case one faced by Robert, since the loss of his coins is not certain, the Gemara is proposing maybe you permitted to transfer Ma'aser Sheni to it. And the Gemara now says, look, at the end of the day, you can't compare, because you can't have uncovered wine that's fit for sprinkling in the house for the aroma, because whether it was sprinkling in your home area or in the public area, or you can't knead clay with it, or you can't have dust the house with it, or you can't give it to your animal, or the animal is fed, any sort of toxicity is at risk to human or animal life. And therefore you've got to toss it and throw it away. So the Brisa tells us that uncovered beverages are prohibited not only for drinking, guys, but also for other uses like sprinkling. So, and therefore no use at all. And yet the Brisa permits the Levi to designate them as Trumas Ma'aser to the Kohen. Okay? And we're going to deal, we've got 5 minutes to deal with it. So we say that there is a possible way to do it, because he passes the wine through a strainer, thereby rendering it permissible for use in accordance with Rav Nehemiah, because Rav Nehemiah says, look, you've got a straining device. It's subject to the laws of uncovered liquids. So if the strainer is left uncovered, the wine is forbidden for use. But Rav Nehemiah said, look, there's a lower receptacle and an upper receptacle. And that if the upper receptacle is uncovered, it's fine, because as long as there's a low receptacle of a filtering process, because the venom of a serpent is like a sponge, which means it floats on the surface and remains in its place. It doesn't pass through the filter, and therefore it remains uncontaminated. And therefore, because it's uncontaminated, you can still use the wine for sprinkling and touching it. If you've got a tumah case where it's spiritually forbidden for drinking, but it's got a hole in the barrel, and therefore it's a low loss to the Kohen because it's not drinkable wine. So if we're preventing Gavin the Kohen from drinking wine because of the hole in the barrel, we've got to give him a barrel without the hole in it, because that drinkable wine is worth a lot of money, but not wine that you sprinkle for aroma. But in this case, you're still able to save it for the very purpose that if you're putting it with a strainer, or you're rendering it useful by straining the wine and separating it with a way to make sure that the poison remains far out of use, you wouldn't drink it because the tamei aspect, but you can certainly use it to sprinkle around your house. And therefore the traveler may not transfer Ma'aser Sheni sanctity to the coins, because in that case, the contrast of the potential loss represented by the coins is a far greater degree, even though it's a 50-50, then a definite loss of a item which is of minor value, of wine for Gavin the Kohen, who can sprinkle it around. Okay, and then we just, let's just see how much time we've got. We've got 3 minutes. I just want to go through it and then we're done. So the Gemara is basically saying you can't compare it to the risk of the high value of transferring Ma'aser Sheni sanctity to the coins. So the Gemara says, hang on, how can you attribute this to Rav Nehemiah? Why? Because the rule of Rav Nehemiah, according to Rabbi Simon, not Rabbi Shimon, by the way, who said in the name of Rav Yeshua ben Levi, this is only in a case where you don't mix the wine after it's uncovered, because then it's toxic. It doesn't help to have a lower filter and an upper filter. And if it's uncovered, even Rav Nehemiah would say it's prohibited for use. So we say it's a case where Rav Nehemiah's leniency doesn't apply. So we're saying the only way it can apply is if it's possible to place something like a filtering cloth on the opening of a barrel, and if you pour the wine slowly, the venom is not going to penetrate the wine. And therefore, that can be attributed to Rav Nehemiah. Okay? So it's at that point that we're going to end. We've got 2 minutes left. I just wanted to wish you a
Damon?
good... Yeah.
Thanks for wishing us. There's a quick question. Wouldn't the barrel with the hole in it be more holy wine?
Very, very funny.
And Damon, I think even to this day, if you, let's say, pour yourself a glass of water in the evening and you leave it overnight, people don't drink it the next morning.
So that's a different
Based on,
reason.
still to this day.
Yeah, that's a different reason. Some people say it's because we hold the tradition of the minhag of the uncovered water because of the poisonous toxicity of the snake. And others say there's tumah, that when a person sleeps, there's tumah and you can't leave it. That's spiritual toxicity as opposed to physiological toxicity. So both reasons apply.
But and then even today, if you open a bottle of wine and you leave it exposed to air, okay, it actually goes bad much quicker than if it's sealed up. That's why
So that's what you call discernible damage. We learned with Rav Chia versus Rav Oshia the difference between discernible damage where it affects the quality of the wine versus a spiritual unseeable factor that affects the value of the wine, but not the physical quality that's perceptible. Okay. Enough whining about that.
But it's also, Damon, if you leave it open and then you drink it, the wine's not as good, so you can't hit that right spiritual level that you want to hit.
That's true. The spirits raise the spirits.
Spirits, Arthur.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Monday, what time? 5. 10 past 5, 20 past
5 is good. Look, I'll be on the 8 but we can do what we did last time.
Yeah, I might be on my way. I'm going to a wedding, but I'll listen in. You'll like I've done before.
Sure. Done.
Well, I might be, yeah. Okay, cool. Okay.
All right. Cheers, guys.